Decorating the House for Christmas. A cozy holiday sleep story. The world was different when she woke. Not in a sudden, jarring way, but in the manner that a deep, settled peace can alter the very texture of a morning. Alara had gone to sleep in the familiar quiet of a late autumn night, the sound of a distant owl her only company. But she awoke to a silence that was deeper, softer, a silence that seemed to have weight and substance. Before she even opened her eyes, she knew. It had snowed. She lay still for a long moment, tucked beneath the comforting weight of a down comforter, listening. The usual morning chorus was absent. There was no rattle of the mail truck making its early rounds down the lane, no distant hum of traffic from the main road a mile away. The world had been wrapped in a thick, insulating blanket of white, muffling every sharp edge and sound. It was as if the sky had gently placed a finger to its lips, hushing the entire valley. Slowly, Alara opened her eyes. The light in her bedroom was pale and diffuse, a soft, silvery glow that seemed to emanate from the very air itself. The ceiling above her, usually a simple expanse of white plaster, was now painted with the faint, dancing reflections of light bouncing off a pure, unbroken surface. She pushed herself up, her bare feet finding the cool, smooth wood of the floorboards. She padded to the window, her heart beating with a quiet, childlike anticipation that she only ever felt on mornings like this. Her cottage was small, nestled amongst a stand of old pine and birch trees, and her bedroom window looked out over the small garden she tended so carefully from spring to fall. Now the garden was gone, replaced by a landscape of soft, pillowy mounds. The stone bird bath was a perfect snow-covered mushroom. The skeletal branches of the rose bushes wore thick white sleeves, and the picket fence that bordered the property had transformed into a soft, undulating wave of white. Every surface, every line and angle, had been softened and made beautiful. The snow was still falling, not in a hurried, frantic blizzard, but in a slow, aimless drift of perfect, intricate flakes. They descended with a lazy grace, spiraling and turning in the still air before settling onto the already deep blanket below. It was mesmerizing, a silent, unending ballet. Alara pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window pane, her breath misting the surface for a moment before fading away. She felt a profound sense of stillness settle over her, a feeling of being perfectly enclosed and safe within her small, warm home, while the world outside underwent its gentle transformation. This was the first true snowfall of the season. There had been flurries, of course, fleeting dustings of white that melted by noon, but this was different. This was a snow that had come to stay. It was a snow that signaled a change, a turning of the page from the muted browns and grays of late autumn to the deep, quiet sleep of winter. And for Alara, it signaled something else entirely. A librarian by trade, she lived a life ordered by the quiet turning of pages and the gentle rhythms of her small town. Her days were filled with the scent of old paper and binding glue, the soft rustle of people lost in stories. She loved her life, cherished its predictable comforts. But there were moments like this, that called for a break in the routine, for a day dedicated not to the stories of others, but to the quiet story of her own life, of her own home. She moved from the bedroom and down the short hallway into the main living space of the cottage. It was one large room, with a vaulted ceiling and exposed wooden beams from which her grandfather had hung dried herbs decades ago. A comfortable, slightly overstuffed sofa faced a stone fireplace, and bookshelves filled with volumes of every shape and size lined two of the walls. A cozy window seat, piled high with knitted cushions, looked out the large front window, offering the best view of the lane and the woods beyond. It was her sanctuary, a space curated not with a designer's eye, but with a lifetime of love and memory. Her grandmother had lived here before her, and the cottage still held the gentle echo of her presence. Alara moved into the small kitchen area and filled the kettle, its familiar weight a comfort in her hands. As the water heated, she stood by the front window, gazing out at the snow-laden branches of the massive blue spruce that stood like a sentinel at the edge of her property. Its boughs were heavy with white, each layer of needles outlined in perfect detail. It looked ancient and wise, a true king of the winter forest. And in that moment, watching that magnificent tree, the decision bloomed within her, as quiet and natural as the falling snow. Today was the day. It was not a day for errands or for cataloging new arrivals at the library. It was not a day for productivity or for crossing items off a list. It was a day to be set aside, to be made special. Today she would decorate for Christmas. It was a tradition she held dear, a ritual performed alone each year, not out of loneliness, but out of a deep-seated need for quiet reflection. Her grandmother had always said that decorating the house was like writing a letter to winter, welcoming it in and making it cozy. It was an act of creating light and warmth in the darkest time of the year. The thought sent a gentle hum of warmth through her, a feeling that had nothing to do with the kettle that was just beginning to whistle. She poured the hot water over a spoonful of loose-leaf tea in her favorite mug, a sturdy ceramic piece glazed in the colors of a stormy sea. The steam rose to meet her, carrying the fragrant scent of bergamot and black tea. She wrapped her hands around the mug's warmth and returned to the window seat. The snow continued its silent descent. A cardinal, a startling slash of crimson against the white, landed on a branch of the spruce, shaking loose a small shower of powdery snow. The world was so still, so peaceful. The decision felt absolutely right. It felt like the only thing to do. She would spend the day in a slow, deliberate conversation with memory, with tradition, with the very spirit of this house. She would embark on the quiet, sacred pilgrimage to the attic and bring down the boxes that held the ghosts of Christmases past. She would transform this already beloved space into a haven of festive light and gentle magic. She took a slow sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her chest, and smiled. The day had found its purpose. The decision, once made, settled into her with a comfortable weight, like a familiar, well-loved blanket. There was no rush, no sense of urgency. The day stretched before her, a clean, unmarked page, and she was in no hurry to fill it. The magic of this ritual was in its slowness, in the deliberate, mindful pace she allowed herself to adopt. This was an act of slow living, a gentle rebellion against the frenetic pace the holidays often seem to demand of the outside world. Here, in her quiet cottage, time would move at the speed of falling snow. She finished her tea, rinsing the mug and placing it carefully in the drying rack. She moved through the cottage, her movements unhurried, preparing her space. She tidied the stack of books on her bedside table, plumped the cushions on the sofa, and swept the hearth, even though there was no fire lit yet. These small acts of order were part of the process, like clearing a space in a garden before planting new seeds. She was preparing the canvas before beginning to paint. When the living room felt calm and ready, she turned her attention to the small, unassuming square of plywood set into the ceiling of the hallway. The attic. It was less a room and more a repository of time, a dusty archive of a family's life. The journey to it was always the same, a sequence of small, familiar actions that felt almost ceremonial. First, she retrieved the old wooden pole that leaned in the corner of the coat closet. Its end was fitted with a simple brass hook, worn smooth and shiny from years of use. Her grandfather had fashioned it himself, and holding its sturdy weight in her hands was like holding a tangible piece of him. She positioned herself directly beneath the attic door and reached up with the pole, fitting the hook into the small metal ring. A firm, steady pull, and the spring-loaded door gave way with a soft groan, unfolding the slatted wooden ladder that descended to the hallway floor with a series of gentle rhythmic clunks. The moment the door opened, the air in the hallway changed. A different scent spilled down, the unique perfume of the attic. It was a dry, clean smell, a complex blend of old sun-baked cedar planks, brittle paper from stacks of forgotten newspapers, and the faint, almost sweet scent of dust itself. It was the smell of time, of things carefully stored and patiently waiting. She stood at the bottom of the ladder for a moment, breathing it in. It was a scent that instantly transported her back to childhood, to rainy afternoons spent up there with her grandmother, sorting through old photographs and trying on vintage hats. The attic wasn't a place of forgotten things, but a library of memories, and today she was checking out a very specific collection. With a deep, cleansing breath, she began to climb. The wooden rungs were solid beneath her feet, the slight creak of each step a familiar sound. The air grew cooler as she ascended, the warmth of the cottage receding below her. She reached the top and hoisted herself onto the floorboards, her body moving with an easy, practiced grace. She paused, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dim light. The only illumination came from a single circular window set into the far gable end of the house. It was like a ship's porthole, and through its dusty glass, she could see the swirling, hypnotic dance of the falling snow. The light it admitted was soft and ethereal, casting long, gentle shadows across the space and illuminating the millions of dust motes that hung suspended in the air, a silent, glittering galaxy. The attic was tidy, a testament to her grandmother's orderly nature. Old furniture, shrouded in white cotton dust sheets, stood like silent ghosts along one wall. A steamer trunk, covered in faded travel stickers from places like Florence and Vienna, sat beneath the window. Stacked neatly against the slanted roof were boxes of all shapes and sizes, their contents a mystery to be unraveled another day. But Alara knew exactly where to look. In the far corner, set apart from the rest, was a neat stack of 5 sturdy cardboard boxes. They were different from the others, larger, more robust, and sealed with a care that suggested their contents were precious. On the side of each box, written in her grandmother's elegant looping cursive, was a single word: Christmas. Ilara's heart gave a little flutter of affection and anticipation. Her grandmother had been a woman who understood the importance of ritual. She hadn't just stored the decorations. She had curated them, protected them, given them their own special place of honor even in their dormant state. She ran her hand over the top box. The cardboard was cool and slightly rough beneath her fingertips. She could feel the faint indentations of the script, a braille of memory. There was Christmas tree, and Christmas lights and tinsel, and Christmas mantle and wreaths. And then there were 2 boxes simply labeled Christmas ornaments. Those were the real treasure chests. One by one, she carefully slid the boxes toward the opening in the floor. They were heavy, not just with their physical contents, but with the accumulated weight of years, of memories, of every holiday season they had ever witnessed. She worked slowly, methodically, her breathing steady in the cool, quiet air. There was a reverence to her movements, a sense of handling something sacred. She slid the first box, Christmas lights and tinsel, to the edge of the opening and carefully lowered it down the ladder, guiding it from above until it rested safely on the hallway floor. She did the same with the others, creating a small, promising stack below. She saved the 2 ornament boxes for last. As she handled them, she could hear the faint, muffled clinking from within, the gentle sound of glass and metal shifting against their tissue paper nests. It was a sound that was pure Christmas, a sound that promised magic and light. Once all the boxes were safely down, she remained in the attic for a final moment. She walked to the small round window and wiped a clean circle in the dust with the sleeve of her sweater. She peered out at the transformed world, at the soft, silent blanket covering everything. From this high vantage point, the cottage felt like a ship adrift on a vast, white sea. It was a feeling of perfect, peaceful isolation. A deep sense of gratitude washed over her. Gratitude for this house, this sanctuary. Gratitude for the grandmother who had filled it with so much love and had passed down these quiet, meaningful traditions. And gratitude for this day, this snow, this perfect opportunity to retreat from the world and create a small pocket of warmth and light all her own. With one last look, she turned, descended the ladder, and with a gentle push, folded it back into the ceiling, sealing the quiet, dusty world of the attic away for another time. The pilgrimage was complete. The real ceremony was about to begin. Down in the warmth and light of the living room, the boxes stood like a collection of mysterious gifts waiting to be opened. The air still carried a faint, cool scent from the attic, which now mingled with the ambient warmth of the cottage, creating a unique fragrance of old paper, cedar, and home. Ilara felt a pleasant hum of energy, the quiet excitement that comes from embarking on a beloved task. She decided to start with the boxes labeled Christmas ornaments. They were the heart of the collection, the keepers of the most potent memories. She knelt on the soft rug before the fireplace and carefully pulled the first box toward her. She ran her fingers over her grandmother's handwriting, a script as familiar and comforting as a favorite melody. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she lifted the lid. The scent that rose from the box was immediate and powerful. It was the smell of Christmases past, a faint, lingering hint of pine from decades of proximity to fresh trees, the dry, papery scent of old tissue paper, and a subtle, almost spicy aroma from the cinnamon-scented pine cones that were always part of the decor. It was a perfume of pure nostalgia. Inside, the box was a sea of white tissue paper, each precious item individually wrapped and nestled against its neighbors. It was a testament to the care and love with which these objects had been treated year after year. This was not a task to be rushed. Each small package deserved its own moment, its own quiet unveiling. Ilara reached in and lifted out the first one. It was small and light, the paper crinkling softly in her hands. She carefully unfolded the delicate layers, her movements gentle and precise. Revealed in her palm was a tiny, spun-glass bird, its delicate tail fanned out like a piece of frozen lace. It was impossibly fragile, shimmering with an iridescent light as she turned it in her hand. This was one of the oldest ornaments, one her grandmother had cherished. She remembered her grandmother lifting her up as a small child, letting her be the one to place the glass bird on a high branch, her tiny fingers clumsy and careful. Her grandmother's hands had been steady on her waist, her voice a low, encouraging murmur. "Gently now, Ilara. She needs a safe place to watch over the room." Holding the bird now, Ilara could almost feel the phantom sensation of those strong, gentle hands, could almost hear the soft cadence of her voice. She set the bird carefully aside on a piece of velvet she had laid out on the coffee table, a safe harbor for the unwrapped treasures. The next parcel was heavier, more substantial. As she unwrapped it, a familiar lumpy shape began to emerge. A smile touched her lips before she even saw it completely. It was a snowman, clumsily fashioned from air-dry clay, its surface pockmarked with the small fingerprints of its creator. Its eyes were two uneven black dots, its carrot nose was a bit crooked, and its smile was a wobbly, incised line. A faded red ribbon was tied around its neck as a scarf. She had made this in her second-grade art class, and she remembered being impossibly proud of it. She had presented it to her parents as if it were a masterpiece, and they had treated it as such, giving it a place of honor on the tree every single year. She traced the shape of one of her own fingerprints, now preserved forever in the hardened clay. It was a direct link to the little girl she had been, a girl who believed in the magic of Christmas with her entire being. She continued her slow, meditative excavation of the box. Each ornament was a key that unlocked a different door in the corridors of her memory. There was a beautiful, hand-painted wooden nutcracker, a gift from her father after he took her to see the ballet for the first time. She remembered the awe she felt, the soaring music, the dancers who seemed to float across the stage. The nutcracker's painted jaw was slightly chipped on one corner, a tiny imperfection that only made it more dear. There was a hollow silver bell that produced the most delicate, ethereal chime when she shook it. This one marked her first Christmas living in the cottage alone after her grandmother had passed. A friend had given it to her, saying, "So you'll always have a little bit of magic." That first year had been difficult, the traditions feeling hollow and heavy with absence. But hanging that bell, hearing its tiny, hopeful sound fill the quiet room, had felt like a small step forward, a promise that new memories could be made, that joy could coexist with sorrow. She unwrapped a string of small wooden beads painted with cheerful red and white stripes, a garland she and her mother had made one snowy afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table with paints and brushes, their hands messy and their laughter filling the house. She could almost smell the acrylic paint and the hot chocolate her mother had made for them. And then she found it, nestled at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in an extra layer of soft, yellowed tissue paper. She knew what it was by its distinctive spherical shape and its reassuring weight. As she peeled back the final layer, it caught the soft light from the window and glowed with a deep, ruby-red warmth. It was a simple, unadorned glass bauble, but its surface was imperfect, showing the faint waves and bubbles of old, hand-blown glass. This had been her grandmother's favorite. She had called it her heart ornament. "It's not the fanciest, Ilara," she used to say, her fingers gently polishing its surface with a soft cloth, "but it holds the light better than any of the others. See how it glows from the inside out? That's what a happy heart looks like." Ilara held the red bauble in both hands, its surface cool and smooth against her palms. It felt sacred, a direct connection to the woman who had shaped so much of her world. She saw her grandmother, S, face in her mind, S-I. The kind eyes crinkled at the corners, the gentle smile. The memory was so clear, so vivid, that a wave of emotion washed over her, a feeling that was a complex mix of love, loss, and profound gratitude. It was not a sad feeling, but a deeply poignant one. It was the bittersweet ache of loving someone who is no longer physically present, but whose presence is still felt in 1,000 small, significant ways, in the pages of a book, in the scent of a recipe, in the warm glow of a red glass ornament. She carefully placed the heart ornament with the others on the velvet cloth. The coffee table was now covered in a sparkling array of treasures, each one a silent storyteller. She had only opened one of the ornament boxes, but already the room felt fuller, populated by the gentle ghosts of Christmases past. The air was thick with unspoken stories and dormant joy, just waiting for the tree to awaken them. The snow continued to fall outside, a silent, steady curtain, and inside, surrounded by her history, Ilara felt a deep and abiding sense of peace. This, she thought, was the true beginning of Christmas. With the first box of ornaments unpacked and their stories gently awakened, the living room now felt charged with a quiet, expectant energy. The colorful collection on the coffee table seemed to be waiting, their sparkling surfaces anticipating their yearly return to prominence. It was time for the centerpiece, the grand stage upon which these small actors would play their parts. It was time for the tree. Ilara rose from her place on the floor, stretching her legs. She walked to the back door of the cottage, which opened onto a small covered porch where she kept her firewood stacked and her gardening boots lined up in a neat row. Leaning against the wall of the house, protected from the elements, was the Christmas tree. She had chosen it the previous weekend from a local tree farm run by an old man with a kind face and hands as weathered as tree bark. It had been a crisp, cold day, the air smelling of frost and damp earth. She had walked the rows of evergreens, running her hands over their needles, searching for the one that felt right. She wasn't looking for perfection, not a tree that was perfectly symmetrical or impossibly dense. She was looking for character, and she had found it in this beautiful Fraser fir. It was tall, but not too wide, just right for her small cottage, with strong, upswept branches and a slightly whimsical tilt to its very top, as if it were perpetually curious. Now she slid open the glass door, and a rush of cold, clean air swirled into the room, carrying with it the scent of snow and damp wood. The porch was dusted with a fine layer of powder that had blown in under the eaves, and the tree itself had a light frosting of white on its needles. It looked magnificent. Bringing it inside was always a gentle, slightly clumsy dance. She had laid an old sheet on the floor, creating a path from the door to the chosen spot in the living room, right beside the large front window. She grasped the trunk of the tree, its bark rough and solid in her hands. She took a deep breath and began to maneuver it through the doorway. The branches, stiff with cold, scraped softly against the doorframe, releasing an immediate, glorious burst of fragrance. The room was instantly filled with the sharp, resinous, and deeply comforting scent of fresh pine. It was the smell of the deep woods, of winter, of Christmas itself. It was a scent that bypassed thought and went straight to the heart, awakening a primal sense of festive anticipation. It was, Ilara thought, the official scent of the season's beginning. She wrestled it gently through the door, needles brushing against her sweater and leaving tiny green flecks on the fabric. She guided it across the sheet, its base bumping softly along the floor, and finally brought it to a rest in the center of its designated space. The room suddenly seemed smaller, fuller, now that this piece of the forest was standing within its walls. The next task was to get it into its stand. This was the one part of the process that could be a little tricky to do alone, but over the years she had developed a system. The stand was old, made of heavy, dark green cast iron, with a deep well for water and 4 sturdy screws to hold the trunk in place. It had belonged to her grandparents and had probably held 50 Christmas trees in its lifetime. It was another piece of the family history, solid and dependable. She laid the tree on its side and, with a bit of effort, lifted the base of the trunk and settled it into the stand, tightening the screws just enough to hold it loosely. Then came the moment of truth. Grasping the trunk, she slowly, carefully, began to lift the tree into its upright position. It was heavier than it looked, a solid, living thing. With a final push, it was vertical, its top branches brushing against the high ceiling. It stood there, slightly askew, a wild, beautiful presence in her cozy, ordered room. She spent the next 10 minutes in a slow, circling dance around it, adjusting the screws, stepping back to check its angle, nudging the base with her foot until it stood perfectly straight and tall. The process was a meditation in itself, a quiet negotiation between the wildness of the tree and the geometry of the room. Finally, it was perfect. She stood back, her hands on her hips, and admired her work. The bare tree was beautiful in its own right. Its branches reached out, creating an intricate, layered silhouette. The needles were a deep, rich green with a silvery underside that seemed to capture and hold the soft light from the window. It was waiting, a blank canvas of potential. Alara went to the kitchen and returned with a large watering can, filled to the brim. She knelt down and carefully poured the cool water into the stand's reservoir. The tree was thirsty after its time at the farm, and it drank greedily, the gurgling sound a satisfying sign of its vitality. As she poured, she noticed a few drops of clear, sticky sap had oozed from the cut base of the trunk. She touched it with her fingertip. It was tacky and smelled intensely of pine. She wiped her finger on an old cloth, but the scent lingered on her skin, a fragrant reminder of her work. For a long time, she simply sat on the floor, leaning against the arm of the sofa, and looked at the tree. It changed the entire feel of the room. It brought the life of the outdoors inside, a symbol of resilience and endurance. The evergreen, a promise of life continuing even in the dead of winter. A steadfast beacon of hope in the darkest months. Her grandmother had taught her that. "The other trees sleep, Alara," she'd said, "but the fir tree stays awake to remind us that spring will always come back." The branches were beginning to relax in the warmth of the cottage, slowly unfurling and settling into their natural shape. They seemed to be stretching, making themselves at home. And Alara felt a deep sense of connection to this tree, this temporary guest that would become the heart of her home for the next few weeks. She had chosen it, brought it into her sanctuary, and was about to adorn it with her most cherished memories. It was a partnership, a collaboration in the creation of holiday magic. The snow fell softly outside the window, and the green branches of the fir tree stood silent and waiting, ready for the first layer of light. The tree stood tall and expectant, its pine scent now a constant, pleasant background note in the room. The next phase of the ritual was one of quiet transformation, the weaving of light into the dark green branches. For Alara, this was perhaps the most magical step, the moment when the tree truly began to come alive. She retrieved the box labeled Christmas Lights and Tinsel. Lifting the lid, she was met with a familiar, orderly sight. Her grandmother, and now she, had a specific method for storing the lights to minimize the dreaded annual tangle. Each string was carefully wrapped around a thick piece of cardboard, the plug tucked neatly into a slit at the end. It was a simple trick, but one that transformed a potentially frustrating task into a smooth, satisfying one. She pulled out the first cardboard rectangle and began to unwind the string of lights. They were the classic warm white kind, with small bulbs that promised a soft golden glow rather than a harsh bright glare. The wire was a deep forest green, designed to disappear amongst the needles. As she unwound them, the string of tiny glass bulbs made a soft clinking sound, like delicate frozen chimes. She laid out all 4 strings of lights on the rug, a serpentine collection of green wire and dormant sparks. The next step was crucial, the testing. She took the plug of the first string and walked over to the wall outlet near the window. She pushed it in, and with a soft click, the entire length of the string illuminated, casting a warm, inviting pool of light on the wooden floor. Every single bulb was working. A small smile of satisfaction touched her lips. She unplugged it and proceeded to test the other three, and by some small holiday miracle, they all lit up perfectly. There would be no tedious searching for the one faulty bulb that broke the circuit, no frustrating interruptions. The path was clear. Now came the part that required patience and a gentle touch. She had learned from her grandmother that the secret to a beautifully lit tree was to work from the inside out. You didn't just drape the lights on the surface of the branches, you wove them in, giving the tree a sense of inner luminosity, a glow that seemed to emanate from its very core. She took the first string of lights and started near the bottom of the tree, close to the trunk. She pushed the end of the string deep into the dense foliage until her fingers brushed against the rough bark of the trunk. Then she began her slow, methodical work. She wrapped the lights around the trunk itself for a few turns before working her way out along a main branch, winding the wire around and around, securing it on the smaller stems. When she reached the tip of that branch, she looped back toward the trunk and then chose another branch, repeating the process. Her movements were slow and deliberate, a form of active meditation. Her world narrowed to the task at hand, the feel of the pliable green wire in her fingers, the slightly prickly texture of the pine needles against her skin, the gentle clinking of the bulbs as she moved. She was completely absorbed in the rhythmic, repetitive motion of weaving. Now and then she would pause and step back, assessing her progress, ensuring the lights were distributed evenly, creating a balanced web of potential light. She worked her way up the tree, section by section, her arms aching slightly from being held aloft. But it was a pleasant, satisfying ache. The scent of the fir was strong, released anew every time she disturbed a branch. It clung to her clothes and her hair, and she breathed it in deeply, feeling it calm and center her. Finally, after what felt like a long, peaceful stretch of time, she had woven the last string of lights around the top section of the tree, leaving the plug dangling at the back. All 4 strings were now intertwined with the branches, their little bulbs nestled amongst the green needles like dormant fireflies. The tree looked much the same as it had before, just slightly more cluttered with the dark green wires. The magic was still hidden. The sky outside was beginning to fade, the brilliant white of the afternoon softening into the dusky gray of early evening. The timing was perfect. This moment, the first lighting of the tree, deserved the reverence of twilight. Alara walked over to the main lamp in her living room and switched it off. She did the same with the small reading lamp by her armchair. The room was plunged into a deep, shadowy quiet, illuminated only by the pale bluish light filtering in through the snow-covered windows. The world outside was hushed and dim, and her living room was a cozy, shadowed cave. She took the 4 plugs and fitted them into a power strip, her heart beating with the same anticipation she felt every year. She took a deep breath, as if she were about to make a wish, and then she flicked the switch. In an instant, the tree was transformed. 160 tiny points of light bloomed into existence, a silent, breathtaking explosion of warmth. The light was soft and golden, a honeyed glow that pushed back the shadows and filled the room with an atmosphere of profound peace and welcome. Because she had woven the lights so deeply, the tree didn't just look like it was decorated with lights. It looked like it was made of light. The glow came from within, catching the silvery undersides of the needles and making the entire tree shimmer with an inner radiance. The effect on the room was just as dramatic. The warm light cast a web of intricate dancing shadows on the ceiling and walls. The familiar shapes of her furniture, her bookshelves, her whole world were softened and made more beautiful, bathed in this gentle, magical glow. It was a light that didn't just illuminate, it enchanted. Alara sank onto the sofa, her hands resting in her lap, and simply gazed at it. The tree was no longer just a tree, it was a beacon, a warm and welcoming presence. It was the physical embodiment of hygge, the Danish concept of cozy contentment. It was shelter, it was comfort, it was light in the darkness. She sat there for a long, long time, watching the tree breathe its golden light into the deepening twilight. feeling the quiet, simple joy of the moment seep into her very bones. The first and most essential layer of magic was now in place. The stage was lit, and it was time for the players to make their entrance. The tree stood in the corner of the room, a radiant constellation of warm, golden light. Its inner glow was a comforting, living presence in the deepening twilight, and Alara felt she could sit and watch it for hours. But its branches were still bare, waiting for their history, for their stories. The collection of unwrapped ornaments on the coffee table shimmered in the new light, their colors enriched, their glass surfaces reflecting 100 tiny stars. It was time for the heart of the ceremony, the slow and loving process of adorning the branches. This was Alara's favorite part. It was a conversation between the past and the present, a quiet, solitary celebration of family, of memory, and of the simple beauty of beloved objects. She put on a record, a collection of instrumental classical Christmas carols played on a gentle piano. The soft, familiar melodies filled the quiet room, a perfect soundtrack for her meditative task. She picked up the first ornament to be hung, the clumsy clay snowman she had made in second grade. She held it in her palm, its familiar lumpy weight a connection to her younger self. She chose a sturdy branch near the front of the tree, at a child's eye level. As she hung it, carefully looping its faded ribbon over the branch, she smiled. It was a symbol of pure, uncritical childhood creativity, a reminder that the value of a thing is not in its perfection, but in the love with which it was made. Next, she chose the hand-painted wooden nutcracker. She found a prominent spot for him, a place where he could stand tall and proud, as if guarding the tree. The light from a nearby bulb caught the glossy paint on his uniform, making him seem almost animated. She remembered the magic of the ballet, the feeling of being transported to another world, and she felt a wave of love for her father, for his quiet way of showing her the beauty in the world. She moved around the tree in a slow, graceful dance, selecting each ornament with intention. She didn't just hang them randomly. She curated them, balancing colors and shapes, heavy ornaments on the stronger, lower branches, and lighter, more delicate ones near the tips. Each placement was a small creative decision. She picked up the delicate spun glass bird. Its fragility demanded a safe, protected spot. She found a place for it deep within the branches, nestled near the trunk where it was least likely to be brushed against. The light from a nearby bulb shone through its translucent body, making it glow as if it had a tiny captured star inside. It was her grandmother's silent sentinel, watching over the room just as she had said. One by one, the stories found their places on the tree, a small knitted stocking, no bigger than her thumb, that had been on her own very first Christmas tree. A ridiculously cheerful felt reindeer with googly eyes that always made her laugh, a gift from a college roommate during a stressful finals week. A sand dollar, painstakingly painted with a tiny nativity scene that her family had bought on a memorable beach vacation one year when they decided to trade snow for sand. Hanging it, she could almost smell the salt in the air and feel the warm sun on her skin. She reached for the hollow silver bell, the one that marked her first Christmas alone in the cottage. As she lifted it, it gave a soft, clear chime, a sound that cut through the piano music with a pure, sweet note. She hung it on the tip of a branch near the window where it could catch the morning light. It was a symbol of her own resilience, of her ability to create her own traditions, to find her own joy. It was a bell of independence and hope. The process was rhythmic and deeply calming. Reach for an ornament. Hold it and remember its story. Find the perfect branch. Hang it with care. Step back and admire. The repetition was a balm to the soul, a way of being fully present in the moment while simultaneously traveling through time. The tree was slowly being filled, each new addition adding another layer to the beautiful composite story it was telling. It was becoming her family tree, in the most literal sense. The garlands of painted wooden beads, a memory of a laughing afternoon with her mother, were draped in graceful loops, connecting different sections of the tree, just as her mother's love connected all the parts of their family. Finally, only one ornament remained on the velvet cloth. It was the simple, ruby-red glass bauble, her grandmother's heart ornament, This one was special. It deserved the most important place. Ilara held it in her cupped hands, warming the cool glass with her palms. It seemed to absorb the light from the tree, its deep red color becoming a rich, luminous glow. There was one spot, right in the center of the tree, at perfect heart level, where the branches parted just enough to create a natural frame. It was the perfect place. She reached in and carefully hung the red bauble, turning it slightly until it caught the light in just the right way. It hung there, glowing with a soft, steady warmth, the quiet, beating heart of the entire tree. With the last ornament in place, Ilara stepped back, a deep sigh of satisfaction escaping her lips. The work was done. The tree was complete. It was magnificent. It was no longer just a fir tree from a farm, decorated with lights and objects. It was a living monument to her life, to her family, to love and memory. Each ornament was a tiny point of light, not just from the bulbs, but from the stories they held. The clumsy snowman, the elegant bird, the brave nutcracker, the hopeful bell, and the glowing red heart. They were all there, a harmonious chorus of memories, all singing the same quiet, beautiful song. The piano music swelled and faded, and in the warm, gentle light of her creation, Ilara felt a sense of peace so deep and complete, it felt like a blessing. The tree was a finished masterpiece, a beacon of warmth and memory that had completely transformed the main room. But the spirit of Christmas, Ilara felt, shouldn't be confined to a single corner. It should be woven through the entire home, a gentle and pervasive sense of comfort and joy. The decorating was not yet complete. The festive feeling needed to spread, to touch every part of her small sanctuary. She turned her attention to the box labeled Christmas Mantle and Wreaths. Inside, nestled in fragrant tissue paper, were the other elements of her holiday decor. First, she pulled out a long, rustic garland she had made herself over several autumn evenings. It was a simple, beautiful thing, crafted from thin slices of orange that she had dried in a low oven until they were like pieces of stained glass, interspersed with fragrant cinnamon sticks and star anise, all strung together on a piece of natural twine. As she lifted it from the box, the garland released a wonderful, spicy, sweet fragrance that mingled with the fresh scent of the pine tree. It was a warm, comforting aroma, the smell of holiday baking and mulled wine. She carried it over to the stone fireplace. The mantelpiece was a thick, rough-hewn beam of oak, cool and solid to the touch. She carefully draped the garland across its length, letting the ends hang down on either side. The deep, warm tones of the dried orange and dark spices looked beautiful against the pale, cool stone. The simplicity of it felt right for the cottage, natural and unassuming. Next, she found 4 thick, cream-colored pillar candles. They were unscented, as she didn't want anything to compete with the natural aromas of the pine and the garland. She placed them along the mantelpiece, interspersed between the loops of the orange slices. She wouldn't light them yet, that was a ritual for the evenings to come. But their simple, solid presence added to the feeling of warmth and stability. They were promises of future light. From the depths of the box, she retrieved the wreath for the front door. Like the garland, it was handmade and natural. Its base was a circle of woven twigs and grapevines adorned with an assortment of pine cones she had collected from the woods behind her house, a few sprigs of dried eucalyptus, and clusters of faux holly berries that provided a cheerful splash of red. A simple wide bough made of burlap ribbon completed the rustic woodland look. She carried the wreath to the front of the cottage. Opening the door, she was greeted by a gust of cold, snow-scented air and the profound, muffled silence of the evening. The snow was still falling, thick and gentle now in the gathering darkness. Her small porch light cast a golden circle onto the newly fallen snow, making it sparkle as if dusted with diamonds. She hung the wreath on the sturdy iron hook in the center of her deep green door. It looked perfect there, a symbol of welcome and of the turning of the seasons. The circle with no beginning and no end represented eternity and the unending cycle of life. Another piece of wisdom her grandmother had shared. Closing the door, she felt as if she had just placed a seal of contentment on her home, marking it as a place of warmth and shelter against the winter chill. Back inside, she took out the final items from the box: a small antique wooden bowl and a collection of vintage-style glass ornaments shaped like pine cones and acorns. dusted with a fine silvery glitter. She arranged them in the bowl and placed it in the center of her small dining table. It was a simple, elegant touch that extended the festive theme into that corner of the room. The physical work of decorating was now complete. Every box was empty, every treasure in its place. The entire living space now hummed with a quiet, festive energy. The light from the tree cast a warm glow on the stone of the fireplace, the dark wood of the bookshelves, and the sparkling glass on the dining table. The air was a rich and complex perfume of pine, orange, cinnamon, and old beloved things. She had successfully created a cocoon, a haven of sensory delight. Now it was time for her reward. It was part of the ritual, the final act of the day-long ceremony. She went into her kitchen and took out a small saucepan. She poured in rich, whole milk, a generous spoonful of dark cocoa powder, a pinch of sugar, and a dash of vanilla. As she stirred it over a low flame, the scent of chocolate began to bloom, a sweet and decadent counterpoint to the other aromas in the room. She watched the liquid warm, the cocoa dissolving into a smooth, velvety brown. When it was steaming, she poured the hot chocolate into her favorite sea-colored mug. From the spice rack, she took a whole nutmeg and a small grater, and she shaved a light dusting of the fragrant spice over the surface of the hot chocolate. With the warm, heavy mug cupped in both hands, she walked back into the living room. She settled herself deep into the cushions of her favorite armchair, the one with the worn, soft fabric that seemed to molded perfectly to her shape. She tucked her feet beneath her and leaned back, letting out a long, slow breath of pure contentment. The transformation was complete. Her sanctuary was ready. The sun had long since disappeared, and the world outside the windows was a deep velvet blue, almost black. The snow was still falling, a relentless but gentle cascade, and the light from the porch lamp showed it accumulating in soft drifts against the fence. The cottage felt like the warmest, safest place on earth, a tiny island of golden light and fragrant warmth in the midst of a vast, silent, snowy wilderness. Alara sat in her armchair, the only light in the room coming from the soft, constant glow of the Christmas tree. The piano music on the record player had finished, and the only sounds were the faint whisper of the falling snow against the window panes and the quiet, steady rhythm of her own breathing. She took a slow sip of her hot chocolate. The liquid was warm and rich, the deep flavor of the dark chocolate perfectly balanced by the sweet, aromatic dusting of nutmeg. The warmth spread from her chest all the way to her fingertips and toes, a delicious internal coziness that mirrored the comfort of the room around her. Her work was done. The attic was closed, the boxes were empty and stacked neatly by the door, ready to be returned to their dormant state. The tree stood resplendent, a dazzling chronicle of her life, adorned with the physical manifestations of her most cherished memories. The mantelpiece was a rustic, fragrant altar to the season, and the wreath on the door was a silent welcome to all the peace and quiet joy that winter offered. She let her gaze wander slowly around the room, taking in every detail. She looked at the clumsy clay snowman, its lopsided grin seeming to glow in the warm light. She saw the glint of the spun glass bird, hidden deep within the branches. Her eyes found the proud, upright form of the nutcracker, and then the delicate, hopeful shimmer of the silver bell. Finally, her gaze settled on the ruby-red heart ornament hanging in the very center of the tree, glowing with a deep and steady warmth, as if it were a real beating heart pumping life and love into the entire room. A profound sense of peace settled over her, so deep and complete it felt like a physical presence, a warm weight on her shoulders. This feeling, she knew, was Hygge. It was the feeling of being completely safe, comfortable, and at ease. It was the joy found not in grand gestures or exciting events, but in the small, simple, perfect moments. It was the warmth of the lights, the comfort of the chair, the delicious taste of the hot chocolate, the beauty of the falling snow. It was a feeling of being shielded from the worries of the world, of being allowed to let her guard down completely. She reflected on the day, on the slow, deliberate journey she had taken. The pilgrimage to the attic, the unboxing of memories, the gentle dance of bringing the tree inside, the meditative weaving of lights, the mindful placement of each and every ornament. It hadn't been a chore. It had been a form of therapy, a ritual of self-care. By creating this sanctuary around her, she had also tended to the sanctuary within herself. The repetitive, gentle tasks had calmed her mind, and the connection with her past had nourished her soul. She thought of her grandmother, and the feeling was not one of sadness, but of deep, abiding connection. The traditions her grandmother had passed down were not just actions to be repeated. They were a form of love, a way of staying connected across time and space. By performing this ritual, Alara was keeping her grandmother's spirit alive, not just in the house, but within herself. Every ornament, every placement, was a continuation of a conversation started long ago. The snow fell, the tree glowed, the cottage was a haven of perfect, quiet peace. Alara finished the last of her hot chocolate, the sweet warmth a final comforting note. She felt her eyelids growing heavy, her body relaxed and ready for rest. She knew she would sleep deeply tonight, cradled in the warm, golden light of the sanctuary she had so lovingly created. In this small corner of the world, all was right. The past was honored, the present was peaceful, and the future, like the fresh, unmarked snow outside, was full of quiet possibility. Everything was exactly as it should be. If this story resonated with you, please consider showing your support with a like, and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys.